Thanks everybody who's coming out this evening. It is Wednesday, February 17th, and it's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Thanks so much for joining me. I don't often go live on Instagram, and I don't often go live this late on a weeknight, but I've been watching the snow situation in the southern United States and really thought it was a great opportunity to bring together some resources for those of you who are not used to dealing with snow. So thanks so much for coming to this live, and we're hoping to share some resources with you. To give a little bit of perspective for those of you who haven't been watching the weather situation in Texas, there has been a huge freeze in the south, and what that looks like in places like Texas that don't normally get snow is consecutive nights of below freezing temperatures. And so we're talking, I looked at the forecast tonight for Farmers Branch, Texas, and the forecast tonight in Farmers Branch, Texas was -9 Celsius, or basically 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So we are talking never before seen freezing temperatures. I spoke with Paul Macias earlier today, and he mentioned that there was a wind chill warning, which he had never experienced before in Texas. So up here in Canada, I'm near Calgary, Alberta, which is north of Montana. We often have cold at this time of the year. It's February, and essentially we've just come out of the polar vortex where it was -40, -50 degrees Celsius, which is almost -40 degrees Fahrenheit. So all of this is to say, I really didn't understand at first how bad it was for our pool friends down in Texas and in other states that are not used to getting this freeze. But after reading the news and seeing these back-to-back days where the power grid has been shut down, there are people who are forced to shelter in place without proper winter clothing. Their homes are not winterized the way we have them in Canada. They don't necessarily have water. They don't necessarily have electricity. They're being told to stay off of the roads because of icy road conditions. I felt it was really important to talk about the pools. I mean, I don't want to miss the fact that it's vital for all of our pool friends to stay safe and not worry about their pools. But I know a lot of aquatic professionals are starting to wonder, what about my swimming pool? What am I going to do with this unwinterized pool that now has frozen? So I've got Jon Dawe coming on. I'm going to invite him on in just a second. Jon Dawe owns JRD Pool and Spa in Calgary, Alberta. And I got connected with Jon a couple years ago with the Certified Pool Operator course. And he has tons of experience in commercial swimming pools here in Canada, where we typically do winterizing at the end of the season in the fall when we close our pools outside, but he's also an expert when it comes to dealing with frozen pipes and troubleshooting. And so we're going to have a conversation about what those of you in warmer climates who've never seen freezing temperatures before can start to think about with your pools. And this is not going to be a lecture and a full presentation. We're not going to give you everything you need to think about, but I want to give you guys some resources just to start thinking about what to do. I suspect this is going to be multiple weeks and multiple months that we're going to see the fallout, unfortunately, from this, and it's going to push back summer startup for some of you. And that's just, it's a terrible situation. So let me add in Jon Dawe and we'll get started. Thanks to you, those of you who are here. And we've got Jon. Welcome, Jon.
Hi there.
Thanks so much for joining me. So talk to me about frozen pools. What's your experience been with dealing with them?
Well, it's never been good. Honestly, it's absolutely a crapshoot when you have a frozen pool. It's roll the dice and take your chances. Depending on the depth of the pipe under the ground, the exposure of the equipment, where the equipment is even located. Everything plays a factor in it.
So let's say I've got a commercial pool. I'm in Texas. I've never seen snow before in my pool. I just want to go to the site and see what's happening. Where should I start?
Well, in most cases, I would start in the mechanical room. You're not going to see anything obviously underground. Skimmers are already going to be damaged if they're frozen solid. You could try chipping them out, but honestly, it's probably a fool's errand. You're not going to get a whole lot of leeway out of there. Whatever's on the surface is already most likely frozen at minus 18. It's not going to take long for that surface to start freezing up. Hopefully, like I said, the pipes underneath the ground should be solid in most cases. I have yet to see a frozen pool, even inside. We had one year where we basically had air conditioning blowing right on directly onto the pumps. So it went 8, froze the whole mechanical room solid as a rock. And surprisingly enough, even though all the heat was off in the building and pipes were bursting everywhere, the actual pool pipes survived. The only thing that got damaged was the actual mechanical room, which burst every pipe it could possibly grab into, short of the ones directly to the suctions and the return. So the main pipes survived. It was just basically the ones on the ground. The most stagnant ones seemed to get the worst of it. And of course, automation, always fun that stuff always gets broken. So there was a lot of rehabilitation on that one, and it took quite a bit of rebuilding because we basically had to chop everything out short of the filters.
So let's take a step back for a second and say, what about if I don't even have any power? How concerned do you think I should be about my pool if the circulation pump is not running and I've got a couple inches of ice, like you said, at the surface?
Well, especially if it's not circulating. If it was circulating, you'd be fine, right? Moving water rarely ever freezes. We don't have that issue. But if it's not circulating at all, the first thing I would be doing is starting to basically loosen unions and pull every mechanical piece I could off of the system. Loosening the unions is going to take a lot of that pressure off. If there's ice already built up inside there, if you're gentle, you can give it a little wrap and hopefully be able to pull the equipment away. Now, obviously, if power's out, you're really not going to find a warm spot. But the more you take that out and allow that pressure to alleviate that's frozen, because once it starts thawing, that's when the real breakage really starts. Usually it's not so much when it freezes. It's usually when you start thawing, and it has to have somewhere for everything to go, and it just doesn't go where you want it to go. You can have happen where it'll break the pipes wide open, and chances are if you go into any of the sites, you're probably going to find a broken pipe, usually mostly at joints. So T's, 90s, wherever the weakest part is, it's most likely going to bust. The odd time you'll find a linear crack down a pipe, but it doesn't happen too often with rigid. Usually I find it more with flex piping than anything.
So somebody had asked me in a comment before we went on live, what about pulling drain plugs on pumps, heaters, filters? Any thoughts on that? Everything
you can take off is a bonus in your pocket. So take every puck off, take the head off of the filter, obviously be safe about it. There was still pressure inside there. We want to make sure that nobody's getting hurt, but since the power's been off, chances are most of the pressure's been drained out, and once you take most of the stuff out, it's frozen solid, chances of anything actually happening are pretty slim. Remove the pressure gauge, remove everything you possibly can, especially if you remove the pressure gauge and it's solid ice. Chances are you're not going to remove the head, but everything's going to work in your favor. Filters, usually I don't have a whole lot of issues with, especially some of the newer ones like the Taylos and the Tritons. I never really had any break on me, and they've been frozen solid. I'm talking right from top to bottom. So it's unlikely they'll break. They're up to pretty high pressure standards, so they take quite a bit of abuse. But the piping is most likely what's going to happen. Pumps especially, you'll probably have to redo the seals on most of your pumps after a freeze damage like that. Everything's going to get moved just under pressure.
And to finish up what you were saying about removing items that can be removed, would you use a hair dryer, or how hard would you work to remove these items? Like, let's say I go on site and they're not coming off easily. Is this something I should actually try to thaw? Like, how much of it is it a lost cause? How much of it is it something I should actually be really trying to do?
Well, I mean, the pumps are obviously your most prime items. They're going to cost you the most. Labor for piping is whatever labor is down in the States. I don't honestly know. But I mean, the pumps are what's your pricey items, right? I mean, most of these systems, depending on what commercial or residential you have, are probably going to have whisper flows or any kind of high grade pump that's in there that's going to cost you a mint. So, I mean, the more you can take it out, even if, like I said, take the unions off, give it a little quick wrap just to shatter the ice that's in there, just to give it a little bit of break. Take the bolts that might be holding it, mounting it down, and just try to see if you can wiggle it out. If you can wiggle it out, great. Right. Disconnect the power and pull that sucker in wherever you can go. Be aware, though, obviously, if you can't do that, take the lid off, take the bleed plugs out, which are threaded, so they should come out pretty easily. They're not likely to get stuck. and then just loosen every union you can. Obviously, as it thaws out, it's going to create a little bit of a mess. Hopefully you have a drain in your mechanical room. Probes, same thing. If they've been in there for probably longer than 72 hours, that flow train's most likely frozen solid. Most cases, especially up here, hot tub goes down in minus 10, minus 15 weather, you got roughly 72 hours. After that, it's ice. So it's not likely to be non-liquid at this point. It's unlikely, especially since it's been since Sunday. It's just not going to happen. So obviously you got to work for the hardest part at that point. If you do have liquids, awesome. You're way ahead of everybody else. Drain as much as you can out of it. Put antifreeze, non-toxic antifreeze, obviously, our same stuff you use in RVs. Put it on everything that you can possibly get, and that'll even help melt some of the ice as well. So it'll help a little bit in that respect, but obviously if you have no freezing in your pipes whatsoever, get that antifreeze in there as soon as you can, the non-toxic, and that will at least give you a lot of cushion. And if it's, depending on how you have it set up, if it's above grade equipment area in a room, if you can get their piping in there and you can actually elevate it, you can dump antifreeze down. If it's water, it'll push it right back to the pool. So as long as it hasn't been frozen at that back side, you could potentially save your whole system.
Oh, okay. So with that antifreeze, John, am I putting in enough to fill the pipes or just to move what's in the pipe? And then how does that contaminate the pool? What does that look like? Or we're not worried about the water quality, it's all a lost cause now?
Not really. We're talking in bigger volumes, right? So, I mean, the antifreeze you put in there, the worst that happens is it causes foam. If worst case scenario, you have to drain the pool, it's better than having to break the pool. But antifreeze in itself, most cases when I de-winterize a pool, it's going to be very minor issues. For an example, some of the commercial residentials I do, I'll use upwards of 8 to 10 jugs of antifreeze in the system. So okay. 2-3 liter jugs. It'll go through. We'll push it through as quick as we can. Obviously, if we had electricity, we'd use a shop vac, blow out the lines first. And then we blow that antifreeze through, because as the antifreeze goes through and you blow it through, it's just going to wick all the water right out of that pipe. So you've basically left just the antifreeze. And even if the pool is full and you do that, you can actually blow the water out of a main drain and just leave the antifreeze down the bottom. It's heavier, so it's going to stay there. So you can actually protect the pipe from water going back in. And that's how we do it in Canada quite a bit. Some people do it just with air. I mean, there's different companies that'll do it. I personally prefer to drain it down if it's a big pool and do it straight from scratch, put the plugs in the whole shebang. But in most cases, we don't have that option. If we don't, antifreeze, blow it out with a shop vac to the point that basically you see the pink mist come out. And you'll see a little puff every time you do it. Now, obviously, you have no power, so if it's frozen solid, there's not a whole lot you can do about the piping. Hopefully, it's survived, and especially since it's only been for a short period of time, chances are the ground's still warm. So it's not likely to be solid ice right away. The most likely part is most likely the mechanical room. It's more than likely frozen solid. Depending on how the insulation factor is, which obviously nobody bothers to insulate their mechanical rooms, chances are that's going to be the first thing that's going to be frozen solid. Probes, equipment, all of it's going to be most likely solid ice. And that's why I say, that's if you start now, you get the unions off of it, pull it apart, so at least you have some give between them. If you can take it apart, even better. Like, remove it.
If you have any questions, do feel free to throw those directly in the chat. We're happy to get John to address those. I want to talk what you said, John, about the probes. And this is a big one I talk about in the Certified Pool Operator course. A lot of people don't realize that probes are not, they don't last forever. They're very temperature sensitive and they can be compromised really easily. So what's your thought? Can you save a probe, or they're already frozen? We're just assuming they're completely gone at this point.
Chances are they're written off. When it freezes, it's always going to crush. They're not really a high tensile item. They don't really take a lot of abuse. And on average, I mean, they used to have a 2-year warranty on some probes, but they obviously got smart on that because they were replacing way too many probes under warranty. So they decided to make it 1 year. They're a throwaway item, unfortunately. Even at the expense that they are, and I'm sure they're expensive down there, is just as much as they're expensive up here. Chances are you're going to end up tossing them. Unless you caught it early and you pulled them out and put them in some water, chances are they're more likely going to be toast, or they're going to be not really calibrated. So they're going to have a little bit of a hiccup. So depending on how your agency acts down there and whether obviously supply and demand of equipment down there at this point, you might just be better off just to adapt to that for the first little bit. And I'm sure your health agency down there will give you a little bit of leeway for the first little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even talked about startup for the summer or what this looks like, but I do think that this deep freeze that we're talking about in the southern United States, the forecast for Farmers Branch was calling for negative temperatures, negative Celsius for the next 2 days, and then a slow increase above zero. So not out of the woods for several days. And unfortunately, I do think that's going to have a long-term impact on the summer season because there's just not the infrastructure in place to repair a bunch of pools, repair a bunch of pipes. You know, if we need 3,000 probes in the state of Texas for the pools, I don't know what that supply chain looks like right now with the COVID pandemic, right? We've already seen significant boom in construction last summer, the staycation, everything happening with people sheltering in place or staying in their communities to recreate instead of going out on vacation. There was one thing I wanted to key off of that you said, Jon, was the heating. And anything that you heat, those of you in warmer climates, this is a key thing we talk about in safety in general in Canada. Do not use hot water. You're using lukewarm, tepid water anytime you're warming something. You don't want to go to the other extreme, or what's going to happen?
Oh, you'll more than likely have it explode. But even if you use cold water, it's still warmer than ice. So either way, it's going to melt. It's just like putting bacon in hot water. You obviously don't put it in the sink to thaw out the bacon. You just put it in cold water. Still thaws out, works perfectly fine. Yeah, it's just a matter of using common sense when it comes to frozen tubs, unfortunately, and frozen pools. It's just take your time, understand that this is going to be a long, drawn-out process. It's not something that's easily done in hours. So you're not going to be operational and ready to roll. You're going to have to take stock of exactly how much damage is done. And you probably won't know how much damage is done until this is all over and you can actually pressure test the lines if need be, or you're just going to throw a Hail Mary and hope that everything's solid inside your piping. Most likely underground, like I said, I don't see a whole lot of it breaking unless it's really close to the surface. Again, it's a very warm climate. This is a kind of a fluke. In Canada, it takes months for us to start freezing ground. So it's not something that happens overnight. And we've actually had major snowstorms out here that would last 2 or 3 days, and I still had pipes that were not frozen. So it's quite possible that it might be perfectly fun ways, and other ways you're not. Like I said, mechanical room, most likely is going to be the first one you're going to have to deal with.
A couple other questions I was seeing on the internet this week, Jon. Where do you fall in the water density question? So I was seeing some pool operators recommending trying to change water density by adding salt or other supplements to limit how much it will freeze.
I don't know if it's honestly going to solve a whole lot of problems for you. It's already a little late for freezing. So, I mean, you've already passed that train station, so it's unlikely it's going to do anything for you. I mean, all you're really going to do is just add more total dissolved solids that'll basically waste your budget. At this point, The damage is done. You're in damage control at this point. You're past the preemptive stage. So it's all about trying to get as much stuff solved as you can and save as many things as you can. And like I said, I've seen pumps that have been frozen rock solid and still work perfectly fine at the end of the day. Some of them didn't even have need seals done, but it's a catch-22. It really is. It's really like playing Russian roulette. You know you're going to have something in there, but you don't know when it's coming out. So hopefully, like I said, it's just the mechanical room. I mean, obviously, it's the most expensive part of the pool. But if you catch it early enough and you can separate stuff, you might survive most of it and just have to replace a couple of feet of plumbing.
What's your thought on, let's say it's really cold tomorrow. Farmers Branch, Texas is the example that I've been using. It's forecast to be -9 degrees Celsius overnight. That's roughly like 15 degrees Fahrenheit for American people. Let's say they get power back. Do they turn on the pump when it's that cold in an unwinterized setting? What are the risks of doing something like that?
What, 4 days, 5 days now? Chances are ice is formed. So you could check it first if you want. Take the lid off, see if there's moisture there. But obviously, if you have moisture inside your pump and that's the most exposed area in your mechanical area, if you have cold in that room and it feels obviously like you're running into a meat locker, chances are you're fine because the pipes themselves are most likely going to be fine. Again, it's a catch-22. If it's already frozen solid, don't bother. All you're going to do is tear your impeller right off. So you're just going to smoke the motor right out. It's not going to be worth your time. You're just going to cause damage. Thaw it out, take the long term, put a space heater inside the mechanical room. Like I said, the most key thing is loosen as many unions as you can and try to get as many pipes separated as you can that are in the mechanical room. The more you do that, the more likely they are to survive. I've actually seen it happen where you just take the unions off and the thing comes out perfectly crystal clear. There's nothing happens. No pipes broken, nothing. It doesn't happen too often, but it does happen. So if you alleviate that and you take a lot of that system apart, you might get away somewhat scot-free. It's a possibility. I don't know how many odds are going to be in your favor at this point, but it doesn't hurt.
So to clarify for those of you watching, when you're talking about the lid, Jon, you're saying the skimmer lid adjacent to the pump, right? Like that we're removing the lid and seeing if water's flowing or frozen. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, at the wet end, just see if there's actual water pooled in there, if it's solid ice. If it's solid ice, don't bother. Because obviously it's going to be solid ice at the impeller part. There's no point. You're just going to burn out your pump. It's just going to be more expensive. If you thaw it out, you might be perfectly fine, in which case you only have to replace a seal, which obviously is a whole lot cheaper than replacing an impeller or replacing the whole motor.
For sure. Well, and I want to mention too, Jon mentioned heating the mechanical room, and I know you're saying heater. I'm assuming down in Texas there's an absence right now of heat sources, so I want to make sure everyone's very aware to be careful never to bring a barbecue or a grill or any sort of combustible device into an enclosed space. There's a doctor I follow on Instagram reporting a ton of carbon monoxide patients coming into the ER in her hospital because people, out of desperation trying to warm up, are not making the safest decisions. So keep in mind what I said at the start of this live, that we're talking about the pool as something that you have the opportunity to go and check after you and your family are safe and secure, and that you're not taking on any unnecessary risks driving on icy roads or doing anything that could result in your own injury, because frankly, as Jon's been saying, the pool's already either hooped, as we say in Alberta, or it's going to be fine, right?
Yeah, I mean, the damage is done. There's no point rushing over there.
What are your thoughts, Jon, on, sorry, please.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, because I know we have a lot of people with spray parks and splash pads, and they don't get winterized the same way they do in Canada. So you mentioned earlier, we blow out the lines. You recommend using the specific antifreeze that works. But let's say I was looking at one pool in Texas where it's basically a play structure submerged in a shallow wading pool, maybe 12 or 16 inches. What are your thoughts on, like, that's a lot more of a fine system with a lot more valves and specific fittings that could freeze with smaller quantities of water?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at that point, it's more than likely going to be frozen on top, and it's going to have a nice little skating rink. But the piping itself may still be good underneath the concrete. Again, it depends on depth. It's always going to depend on depth. I mean, I've had concrete pools that didn't freeze in the concrete, but as soon as it was exposed, boom, those things are solid ice. And then it's just going to transfer back. Obviously, among sustained cold, it's just going to keep taking that heat and sucking it out as it creates a little bit more ice down the pipe. So hopefully, like I said, if they're deep enough, you'll be fine. It's just a matter of dealing with the stuff that's on top. It's mostly going to be the superficial stuff. Hopefully, you won't have to dig up a whole lot of concrete and fix piping or fittings. The other thing is with splash parks, most of them are usually, depending on how they're designed, some of them are on an angle. So the water's already going back to the vault. So, I mean, if the vault's not solid water, I mean, you could or solid ice, you could maybe get a sump pump, plug it in and drain that thing out, have the pipes drain back through, try to blow antifreeze in it if you got any kind of advantage to that. Like I said, every little bit helps, right? It's just a matter of saving whatever you can at this point. Because everything else, if it's messed up, it's messed up. There's no point in trying to worry about it. You're going to find out sooner or later. So until it's completely thawed out, it's a guessing game.
And I want to remind people, you were mentioning the antifreeze, Jon, but I only learned this today when we were talking earlier. What is the specific antifreeze that I'm looking for so I don't get the wrong one if I go to the store?
Well, don't be using car antifreeze, that's for sure. We don't want that problem. Nobody wants to get sick. Nobody wants to die. Non-toxic antifreeze, use the same thing in RVs. Usually it'll have a freeze point between -40 and -50 is the stuff we use up here. Okay. So yeah, no, the antifreeze, basically the easiest analogy is think of a Slurpee machine. Slurpee machine makes obviously liquid ice, right? It's not frozen solid, otherwise the Slurpee machine wouldn't kick out Slurpees. Same thing with antifreeze. It's meant to take the freeze potential out, and so if it does freeze hard, it's just going to create Slurpee. So it doesn't create outward pressure, so it doesn't bust through the pipe. That's the only reason we have it. So it's just a cover your butt policy.
Okay, awesome. So we've been talking about what to do with pools in warmer climates that have currently been frozen. We've talked about probes, we've talked about pipes, we've talked about pumps, we've talked about removing plugs and loosening fittings. Reagents is a big one I wanted to make sure I mentioned to everyone. So making sure that you understand that your water chemistry testing reagents, the liquids that you use to verify chlorine, pH, alkalinity. All of those have a very narrow operating range, and so freezing those reagents is going to make them compromised. And it may not be visible through the color or the texture, but you do need to know that your reagents are going to be compromised, as well as any testing supplies. Jon talked about probes being compromised. So in your automation system, you have a probe sensing the water quality going to the controller. If you have a photometer or photometric test kit, it will also have some sort of sensor that may be temperature sensitive. So being aware of those as something that will need to be replaced or inspected at a minimum, right? Further down the line.
Well, especially with reagent, most of them, at least for what I use, I'm old school, I use a Taylor test kit. So, I mean, when it freezes, it lets you know. So, especially reagent number one, it's particulate. You see a lot of particulate in the bottom, the reagent's done. It might not be nearly as accurate, obviously, as the new one. You can still use it to some degree, but don't be dedicated to it. At the end of the day, you can obviously test it against another reagent, number one, that's not frozen, and see how it does. It might be a little bit of basically a sleep curve going off of whatever it's supposed to be. But it can still be used to some degree. It's just not going to be nearly as accurate. And usually the particulate gets stuck in the injector anyways. So 9 times out of 10, when you go to squeeze it, it's going to feel like trying to squeeze peanut butter out of a straw. So it's just not going to work for you.
Yeah, and I love what you were just saying. So what are your thoughts too, Jon? I'm thinking now, I hadn't considered this previously, if we have carboys or containers of jugs of chlorine and other liquid pool chem, I'm assuming that there's not a lot of clearance in those containers and they've expanded and ruptured, or they're going to rupture when they start to thaw.
Thawing is when it's going to rupture. Definitely thawing. Okay. And when you have a frozen carboy, it's going to expand. It's going to look like a little Macy's Day balloon, only it's going to be a lot heavier. So when it thaws, you don't want to be anywhere near that cap. Muriatic acid especially, obviously, nobody wants to be getting that to the head, nor do you want it spraying out at a mist in your face. So anything that's frozen, honestly, your best bet is just to take it somewhere where it can do its thing, thaw it slowly, and make sure that nobody can get hurt. So put it in a big Rubbermaid container and let it explode that way. At least it's contained somewhat. It's more unlikely going to split, and 9 times out of 10, I find it usually tends to go out wherever the plug is. The plug just tends to basically come a weak point, because obviously they're not super threaded in there. They're obviously made to get out. So whatever's in there is most likely going to come out through there. I haven't seen too many where they actually split down the sides, but I have seen them solid ice, where it's just basically a block of ice. So if you open that up, and especially once it's thawed out, all that pressure is going to be built up. So as soon as you open that cap, that's coming out basically aerosol. So chlorine, acid, whatever it's in there, neither one of them is going to be great for your face. So make sure obviously you got the PPE gear on if you're going to open it, and open it slow. Kind of like having a soda stream bottle. When you make the soda, you'll obviously take it very slow, or you're just going to get covered in soda. Same deal with this. Open it up till you hiss, make sure your PPE gear is on, and make sure that you got it in an area that you can either clean up easily, and obviously not a whole lot of people around. You want to make sure that you're, at best, the only person that's around that can't damage any equipment or anything else that's in the area.
Would you take the lids off while it's frozen and isolate it in a special location, or do you prefer to wait until you can deal with it all, it started to thaw?
Well, you can definitely try and take it off when it's frozen. Whether it happens or not, it's a whole different story. But it should, in theory, release. But again, especially from hydrochloric acid and muriatic acid, it tends to have a really bad gas-off effect. So you don't necessarily want to come into your mechanical room after you've taken all the caps off and find out that half your stuff's corroded. Because it's just going to have that gas out there as it thaws. It's going to make a mess. And anything that's basically metal in there is going to get a patina to it. So that's my big concern, especially with muriatic and hydrochloric acid. I've seen way too many mechanical rooms where the gas off has just done unholy damage.
Right. So those of you just joining us, we're talking with Jon Dawe of JRD Pool Spa in Calgary, Alberta, and we're talking about pools for those of you in the warmer climates like the southern US, Texas, that are experiencing winter temperatures right now, how to address safety concerns and mechanical concerns right now before it starts to thaw. And we've been talking about how to kind of start thinking about what impact this is going to have on your pool. And in theory, start thinking about how this might delay the summer season. So if anybody has any questions, please do feel free to throw those in the chat box. We have a couple more minutes. I have a couple other things I want to get to, but if you have questions, I'm seeing lots of people who are jumping into this chat. Let us know your questions, what to do. the Canadian contingent here, we can talk definitely about cold, and Jon's done a lot of winterizing. So Jon, talk us through what you would normally do, let's say on a commercial pool in the fall in Canada. What would be the normal process for winterizing a pool?
Well, especially a commercial, you got a lot of cost involved. It's not just like a residential pool. Most residential pools, we won't drain down, especially with a liner pool, obviously, because it's dry. Vinyl is kind of like a living, breathing thing to some degree. So if it gets too dried out, it's just going to pull away, cause all kinds of damage. So we'll usually do those while they're still full, but just below the returns. With a commercial pool, we tend to go above and beyond. So I'll usually drain it right down to the bottom. I will take everything out of that pool that I can possibly grab. So a big commercial pool, say 195,000 liters, it could take me upwards of 6 to 8 hours to properly winterize. So I'll just stay there and I'll blow out all the lines. I'll make sure the sand filters have the caps taken off, pressure gauges are taken out. Anything that basically could hold water in a place that it should be holding water is taken out. Piping, any unions, all loosened, pumps taken apart, you name it.
Well, and it was interesting as you were saying that, I was remembering too, a lot of pools, even in the mechanical room or in the filter room, wherever the piping connects to the pump, a lot of pools that I've worked at, they don't have any sort of evacuation port or waste line that you can just open so that there's air release. Like you're not doing a true drain. There's always some sort of water left in the lines. So is that something that people in the South right now dealing with frozen temperatures, would that ease some pressure if they have those connections?
Well, the vacuum release is probably going to be frozen solid too. Everything's going to be frozen solid at that point. So honestly, it's going to be small streams of water. So they're going to be the first things to freeze. 4 and 6 inch lines, you might be okay. You might have just the ice forming enough that it's pulling in and you might get away with it. It's quite possible. But like I said, the quicker you get to it, obviously, with the bigger commercial systems, the better chance you have. Smaller ones, anything that's in 2 inch lines and under, chances are you're already done down the road. So it's already frozen. There's no point. Like I said, 72 hours with a hot tub, 2 inch lines are frozen solid. So that's 104 Fahrenheit and it's bleeding off over 3 days. You had 85 Fahrenheit, most likely at most of these pools. Chances are they're not therapy pools. They're more than likely frozen solid. So it's chances of you going in there and finding just water is pretty slim. But like I said, every little bit helps. If you take those unions off, if you loosen stuff off, take it out of the equipment area, you can save yourself quite a bit of the money that might have got broken up otherwise. You can even take the heat exchanger off if you want. Loosen the nuts, snap the unions if you can, if you have to. The heat exchanger, if you thaw it out, it is metal. It'll have somewhere for the pressure to go. It's not likely to rupture. So again, it's every little piece that you can save is money in your bank. And especially when something freezes like that, every penny counts because you're going to be spending it on piping and labor later on.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but I do think the reality of this is going to be a lot of insurance claims and a lot of mechanical, and it's going to imperil some pools for the summer startup because not only that, but some pools are not going to be able to afford the repairs this year, knowing that they're operating at reduced occupancy because of COVID restrictions. And it's just, it's really devastating for our pool friends down in these warmer climates. So last couple of questions I have, Jon. Let's say I have a large commercial pool area and I've got multiple basins. So let's say I've got a water slide, I've got a lap pool, I've got a kiddie pool, I've got a spa or hot tub. My lap pool is more expensive than my spa or hot tub, but do you think what you've been saying, smaller pipes and smaller fittings, where should I focus my efforts? On the bigger, more expensive basins or on the smaller, more delicate basins infrastructure-wise?
Well, I mean, if you can get all of them, obviously. Everything else, it's union. So it's not like it's going to be something that's super time consuming. I can usually tear apart a commercial system, at least the ones I'm used to dealing with, within about probably 2 hours with a pair of channel locks. It doesn't take that long. Okay. So really, it's just a matter of get a couple of the boys together, the girls, give them a pair of channel locks or pump pliers and let them go with nuts. That's basically all it is. It's do as much as you can. You don't have to take it right apart if you don't want to. If it's solid ice and you can't do anything with it or you're worried about breaking, leave it. Just loosen the union. If nothing else, that union is going to help you a lot. It might survive that pipe. That pipe might have enough that it'll just survive that freezing. And it does happen. Sometimes it's just the little tiny things that make the biggest difference with the pool industry. And especially since the pool industry has been so hard hit this year, right? I mean, hot tub industry is laughing all the way to the bank. But the commercial industry has just been taking a kicking. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's, every little bit helps to keep money in your pocket, and especially right now, that's going to be very important, especially coming with the few months that are going up. Obviously, limited occupancy means limited income coming in, limited funds coming from the government if you're getting it from the government. So every little bit is a penny in your pocket. Allows you to keep your staff on, allow you to do stuff that you might not necessarily do otherwise.
Yeah, no, I can't agree more. Last call for questions, and from anybody who's watching. Jon, any other things you want to add that you think are relevant to what we've been talking about?
Well, I mean, I think we've covered basically all the bases. There isn't a whole lot you can do when you freeze a pool, right? You have limited options. At that point, the cat's out of the bag. So obviously, every little bit that you can do that you can save is the most important part. Alleviate the pressure, try to keep everything solid, and obviously don't panic. If water comes out, then say, yay. It is what it is. If you have the water coming back from the pool and it's just ice on top, that's great. I mean, if it's going to come back, it comes back. Obviously, with limited water, if it's already blowing out, then you want to make sure that antifreeze gets in there, especially if the ice is super thick, which hopefully I would think it's not at -18. We take a little bit of time to freeze up and make actual thick ice. So it's not like you're going to have a skating rink per se. It's probably only going to be a couple inches at best. So obviously be very careful with that. You don't want somebody walking on top of that thing and going inside because it's not going to be fun to fish them out. Or if it's empty water, the water's already pooled out of there. Because it can happen where you actually start freezing and the pipes have already broken. And all that water could be in your mechanical room already. In which case, it might just look like it's full, but it is not. So if you go walking on that, you could very well take a 10-foot tall drop right down into your pool, onto your concrete, and have the ice come down on you. So obviously, it's all about being safe, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's an inanimate object. We can always fix it. We can't necessarily fix you if you get a ton of ice on top of you or you break a leg or whatever else, right? But we can always fix stuff. Chances are the concrete basin itself is fine. Like I said, the ground is not likely to have frozen solid in 4 or 5 days. It's just not going to happen. So especially in such a warm state as that, I seriously doubt it's going to be an issue. But the mechanical room is going to be your baby. That's going to be the problem. Skimmers, most likely as well, since they're exposed, they're at the top, they're more likely going to take the brunt of it. But again, that's minor issues. You can chop concrete, take a skimmer out, rebuild, put it back together. It's a hell of a lot less work than, saying, digging up 12 feet of pipe that might be buried down 10 feet. So obviously you don't want to be getting to that point. So the main drains are more than likely fine. Skimmers, more than likely going to have some that are going to be pooched in one way or another. Again, if you're bored and it's nice out and it's not -20, just take a chisel and just gently chip out stuff. Just be very careful. Be understanding that there's a lot of pressure in there. So you don't necessarily want to crack it in there with an axe handle and then watch it basically shatter your skimmer. If you can take out little pieces and give itself a little core somewhere for that pressure to basically alleviate, you might survive it. It might very well come out unscathed. If not, then it is what it is. At the end of the day, you just don't want to have somebody getting hurt for something silly like that.
Well, and to your point, Jon, about the skimmer, I mean, I can't tell you the number of commercial pools I've visited where there's a skimmer that's blocked off or it doesn't work. And I would never recommend that as a long-term strategy, but certainly pools can get through one season this summer missing a skimmer or two, so long as it's not cracked and leaking. And so that's going to be the big thing that people need to consider. It's one thing to try and rescue a skimmer, and it's one thing to break it worse such that you can't operate your pool without it being fixed, right? That's a big one, obviously.
Like I said, at the end of the day, it's all about delicacy. Same thing with ice that's inside the lines. You got to take your time. It's not a rushed job. It's something that's going to take possibly days, maybe even weeks to get everything sorted out. The unions is going to be the quick fix. That's only going to take you probably an hour, 2 hours to start loosening everything up. That's going to allow a lot of that stuff to survive. Same with the pumps. If anything you can take off there that helps that pressure dissipate is going to be great. It's going to work in your favor. Obviously, if you heat that mechanical room once you get power on, you don't need to take a propane torch and put the big jet turbo engine in there. Just put a little space heater. That's all you really need. The little tiny heaters you get from Home Depot are like $32 will save your bacon quite easily. I have them basically, 2 of them in a hot tub right now. They're basically just keeping that thing alive until we get parts from the manufacturers, which obviously is a pain in the butt right now. Manufacturing is obviously like 50% and demands at 200. So it's hard to get parts in stock. So anything you can save is going to save you a ton of grief trying to order it. PVC pipe's going to be a lot easier to get a hold of in fittings than a whisper flow pump or new injectors or anything else, right? Anything you can save is money in your bank.
Yeah, and I do want to stress what Jon is saying is it's not going to thaw overnight. That is a common misconception. Even if you don't have a heat source, we're talking in a lot of commercial pools, let's say we're talking about 500,000 liters or 125,000 gallons. If there is any freezing in certain places, it's 4-6 inches thick. That's going to take a week of warmer temperatures to thaw down, right? It's going to continue to be isolated by cold air unless the whole area or the whole space warms up. So I think some people mistakenly think, okay, well, so on Saturday, it's going to be above zero. When I looked at the forecast for Farmers Branch, Texas, it's going to be a few degrees above 0 Celsius, so perhaps 37 degrees Fahrenheit. That does not mean that it is instantly melting. It's, as Jon's been saying, progressively over several days, you're going to have some water movement, and you're going to be able to go back Monday through Friday next week, and each day maybe you can make some improvements in some of the things Jon's been mentioning, or you can make progressive checks. It's not just suddenly going to go from frozen to liquid.
Well, it's like a frozen TV dinner, right? You're letting it out to thaw. It's going to take a long time. On average, say, for example, when we start opening up outdoor pools here, usually we'll start near the tail end of April, early May. And even then, we still got big blocks of ice just floating around in that pool. It takes a long time. I mean, obviously, it's conditioned. Even if we had plus 20-degree weather, it's still going to take probably more than 7 days. It might even take a couple of weeks. It just depends on how well it goes. Obviously, if it's a nice stable temperature and it slowly goes up, the less extreme, the better. So it's not take a blowtorch and start melting ice. It's basically let it lukewarm and let it thaw slowly, because that's going to take a lot of that damage out. You might get lucky and it might be nothing. It's quite possible. It's happened before. It'll happen again. But be aware that you're going to have to go in there and probably going to have to fix something at some point or another. So if you take your time, understand that sooner or later you're going to have to spend some money, but if you can try to alleviate some of that money now, why not, right? I mean, it's obviously there's going to be a huge demand in Texas, obviously, for pool technicians. And piping's not that bad. I mean, obviously, we all can do piping. It's not that hard at the end of the day. It's basically like playing kinetics for keeps. So you just don't make mistakes. And if you do, just try to fix them. But at the end of the day, it's a hell of a lot easier to deal with. If you can save the equipment, you can save all that stuff. It just saves a lot of grief, because then you can just go back, chop a piece of pipe, put a coupling in, put a new union in, put a new ball valve in if it breaks somewhere else, and just try to save as much as you can.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think this is a great opportunity for those of you who are thinking about, okay, how am I going to do this? Now is the time to do a bit of a inventory of your equipment. And it's not making a huge, big project when you have other things to worry about, but you're going to be going around and looking at this equipment anyway, and you may be doing an insurance claim. And I can speak as somebody who worked at a municipality that was involved in a large insurance claim, and you needed to document and photograph, and you needed to prove the value of items and show what their function was. And that work was a pain in the butt. But honestly, once we had it done, it was so much easier for our service people coming in to know, as a manager, to know what I knew what we needed. And you, if you were coming in, Jon, you'd be able to quickly understand what's new and what's old on a system that you might not have worked on before.
Oh, absolutely. I can go into most systems and I can usually identify what's been changed out at some point or another. So it's just a matter of being used to the industry. When I started, I didn't know where the flow was going into the pump. Now I can't possibly mistake it anymore. But it happens, right? I mean, a lot of people, especially in the pool industry, there's a lot of people that get into it and don't know what's going on. And that's a perfect learning experience right now. You can learn a lot from this. And you can learn different things that might save your bacon next time. I mean, obviously, I don't know if you guys got a whole lot of warning on this. But if I had been warning for a pool, I would have been down there at midnight cracking unions all night long and making sure water was getting out. But at the end of the day, you can only do so much forethought, right? You can only go so far. So obviously, like I said, the cat's out of the bag. All we can do is try to do damage control, limit what we can. I'm hoping that everything works out great, honestly. I mean, if you can get away with nothing and it's just a couple of pieces of PVC, then great. I'm thrilled. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't want to have our system go completely kablooey and then have to replace everything, because it's just going to kill you. Your budget's going to be skyrocketing. Chances are, with especially the current environment that we're in, a lot of it's probably just going to be tapered off till next year, because why bother if you're only going to be doing 25% or 50% capacity?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, John. When we're looking at these pools that have been damaged by the unusual snow in the southern United States, that really is going to be a factor. People are going to have to look at their basins and say, okay, maybe I need a $40,000 pump over here, and I need a $200,000 heater over here. Those are unlikely to be the things that are breaking in these temperatures, but as examples, you're going to have to pick and choose. And ultimately, the person with the purse strings might say, you know what, we don't have $240,000. We're not going to make that much revenue this year. We're just not going to open the pool till 2022. And that's unfortunately going to be the reality. And I think people, as much as it's overwhelming, you need to start thinking about that worst case scenario and really thinking about, okay, what is the worst possible scenario? And hopefully that's not it.
Well, absolutely. Like I said, up here when we had COVID happen, obviously a lot of rules were put out. There was a lot of catching up to do. And most of the condo boards, for example, that had private pools said, well, forget it. Why would I want to have just a couple of residents going in there? We already know they're not going to follow the rules anyways. So why bother? They just locked them all down. It just wasn't worth their time. Some of them drained them. Some of them started doing cleaning. Some of them just left it alone and just moderated it as best you can. Obviously limited the tech time they actually spent down there. And now we're paying for it, obviously, right now. I'm getting calls to get commercial sites back up and running. I just finished a sand filter for a Sheraton not that long ago that obviously went kablooey, obviously, during COVID. And trying to get parts in here was always lots of fun, and then get it done as quickly as possible because they wanted to be back up and running when and if the rules bend for them.
Yeah, I hear you. Let's talk, John, a little bit about your company, JRD Pool and Spa, before we finish off here. And if anybody has any questions, this is our last call for questions. John's been talking about pools and how we can deal with the sudden snowfall in warmer climates that are not used to partially frozen pools.
Well, there's not a whole lot to tell about me. I'm just a friendly guy. I got into the industry.
Talk about your company.
Luck of the draw. I was just a grunt that moved hot tubs. I got interested in fixing hot tubs, and eventually I moved to pools. I was very much a trial by fire. I was thrown into the deep end and learned how to swim. So I've learned a lot over my 14 years of dealing in the industry. I've seen the good. I've seen the bad. I've learned how to get around things. I've learned how to fix things a lot better than I normally would, and I've only gotten better over the years. The main reason I even started my business was to help people out, because there's a lot of crooked people in the industry, just like anything else. Everybody likes to take advantage. Everybody likes to blow up prices. So for the end of the day, I try to be as fair as I possibly can. I try to be as descriptive as I can. So I make sure that when something's broken, I let you know exactly how it's broken. What's the best alternative? How are you going to save your money so that you can keep your commercial system going? How can you get around some of the stuff that's, at the end of the day, you can balance your budget a lot more effectively than if you have some guy come in and say, by the way, here's a quote, it's $40,000 on a napkin, and you don't have any idea what the hell he's going to be doing for that $40K. So it's very much about me just basically being a steady force in the industry, trying to help people out, trying to make sure people aren't taken advantage of.
Yeah, I hear you completely. I had a client probably right before COVID last February. They'd taken the certified pool operator course with me, and you know, John can reach out to me. And they
That's okay. Were they planning to do it with toothbrushes? It must have been the labor. I mean, oh, absolutely. I mean, their mind blows on a lot of this stuff. And honestly, I see a lot of the bigger companies, and what they're doing is they're charging for their reputation, or they're charging for their time because they're going to take it away from something else, right? But at the end of the day, you got to be fair with people. And I've honestly helped a couple of different nonprofits. I've worked with Camp Kindle as well up in the north, and I've helped them out a bit because they honestly had a lot of issues with stuff that had to get done. And it's ridiculous what some of the stuff these people had pulled over. I saw one pool, no word of a lie, a major pool company decided to make a pool for a trailer park and put four skimmers in there on a small pool that was probably smaller than most residentials and 8 returns. It looked like a battleship. There was little cannons everywhere. And I was like, why did they do it? It makes no sense, let alone the fact they didn't even bother to tighten half the MIPs going into the back of the jets, and the thing leaked like a sieve. So they were losing like probably a quarter of their pool sometimes in an operational standard. It was ridiculous. So it's little things like that that really irk me. At the end of the day, if you're going to spend the money, you better damn well do the job proper. Oh, I got a laundry list a mile long. Thanks, guys. I hope you make out okay. If not, like I said, you're welcome to reach out to me if you have issues. I'll help you as best I can. Have a good night.